Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Prime Minister's Questions comes to an end. The two front benches spent most of their exchanges discussing the health service off the back of the looming return of junior doctors' strikes. There was some statistics shared and tossed across the floor of the House, and then we got to mothers. Mr. Cameron saying what he thought his mother would think of Mr. Corbyn. Mr. Corbyn saying what his mother would think of Mr. Cameron. And then, of course, Nye Bevan was dragged in as well, just for good measure. He was the man that founded the health service, for new, younger viewers who may not know that. Not sure we learned much. Let's see what you made of it.
Well, Martin Bristow said the Prime Minister was very forceful and hammered Jeremy Corbyn. If you're going to question statistics, you really must be able to back up your claims. Jeremy Corbyn was caught out by the 11,000 figure and his attempt to think on his feet was pathetic. John Gittos said Labour MPs sit obviously cringing as their leader is being ridiculed week after week. But Tim Bass says Jeremy Corbyn was right to ask questions about junior doctors. I am shocked this dispute continues as the deal offered seems very reasonable to me. Michael Murray says Jeremy Corbyn was magnificent today, totally inspiring. He may not wear a proper suit, but his mother would be really proud of him. John Gray said David Cameron's childish jibe at Jeremy Corbyn about a suit and tie and singing the national anthem were worthy of Donald Trump. Not sure where the insult went there, really. But Renata said David Cameron's mother...
Hit him. That's what Mr. Trump's doing. No, not just him. The last time he spoke in the Nevada caucuses, Mr. Trump said, somebody heckled him. Trump's reply was, I want to smack you in the face.
We're not quite at that level.
You can see it's reached a high level of the Lincoln-Douglas debates.
I think John Burko might have something to say about that if violence is threatened. Renata says, though, that David Cameron's mother would say, save the magistrates' court in Newbury. She is from Newbury and obviously referring to David Cameron's mum being involved in the campaign against Tory cuts to children's centres. And Daniel Cullen in Willingham says, 4 words, the passion is back. I don't know whose, but it's back.
Is that in the West End?
On the Daily Politics or on PMQs?
Is it a musical? Yes, I don't like musicals. I get embarrassed when they start singing. The Tory backbenchers were very well behaved today, weren't they?
They were very well behaved.
What can we do to stop that happening?
Anyone would think that the Tory whips have been going around trying to press backbenchers to be loyal during this very tricky period for the party where everybody's under real pressure to be terribly polite and terribly civilised and terribly dignified. Not quite sure the Prime Minister had read his own memo before he had a big swipe at Boris Johnson in the statement on Monday. But yes, although some Eurosceptics did ask questions in that, they all asked, the local paper question, will the Prime Minister agree with me that everything in my constituency is absolutely marvellous? So really not much sign of
Owen Paterson did it, the rebel who was fired by the Prime Minister. He did it then. But he came up with a question of process that will be followed by about 6 people.
Well, there's been a rumpus in the last 24 hours that yesterday the Cabinet Secretary issued very tight rules saying for the ministers who want to leave the EU, Ian Duncan-Smith, Michael Gove, they will not be able to use the resources of government, the might of the civil service, in order to help them make their case. On the other side, people will. Now, I have to say, we knew that was coming because at the beginning of the year, the Prime Minister said the government will take a formal position on this argument. The government, therefore, is perfectly entitled to use its resources to back up their arguments. But of course, on the other side, what you have, although a very nimble, very committed band of campaigners and an experienced bunch of people too, with quite sort of street fighting, edgy campaign skills, they don't have the trappings of the government machine. And what they also don't have is the ability, as the Prime Minister was very keen to use and did at the weekend, to stand in front of number 10 Downing Street with the famous door, all the visual power of that office, and make this case. We've spent a lot of time discussing in the last few months who was going to lead these campaigns, how is it all going to be? It's very clear now on the Remain side, this is David Cameron's campaign. He thinks he can win it, and it is to an extent going to be all about him.
To what extent, Gisela Stewart, is Jeremy Corbyn going to put the campaigning power and resources of the Labour Party behind the Remain campaign?
Oh, the Labour Party as such is broadly committed to stay in, and therefore the constituencies, and that will go out and work for it. Yeah.
But will they spend money?
I wouldn't have thought so. I don't think we've got much money.
No. Will Mr. Corbyn take a lead role?
I think you've got to almost take this into two stages. We've got important local elections coming up. And whenever you've got referenda questions, we saw that over AV, where the yes or no's, the party political divides don't fall that way. The party machinery will go and try and fight the elections. So they will go until early May. We want to fight our local elections.
Not the referendum.
Not the referendum in that sense.
And then after
Alan
these
Johnson will go...
On the 5th?
Well, people like Alan Johnson will go and
Right.
expect the machinery, but as I won't be part of it, I'm probably not the right person to ask.
I mean, I'll come to you. Yeah. The reason I ask is that many people are suspicious as to just how committed Mr. Corbyn is to staying in the European Union or doing much to make sure that we do. What do you think?
I actually think that apart from the Prime Minister, who essentially this has become existential for him now, the degrees of enthusiasm for the European Union is tempered to some degrees, probably across the political spectrum. They all find fault. The question is just how many of us think that the fault line is so deep that we now actually need to do something about it.
But what do you say about Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I think he still tries, as we saw today in Prime Minister's question, I mean, he still is this believer that you can change the narrative of the political debate, that you don't go for the cut and thrust, that you have debates which take people with him.
At all.
No, but I mean, if I'd been, I wouldn't either, because essentially what matters to our voters in that context is what's happening to the health service, which is horrendous.
What are you I'm finding it hard to get out of Labour politicians. Where will the big rallies be? Will Mr. Corbyn be at these big rallies? And how much money will be raised to spend?
I suspect that Jeremy Corbyn's role will actually be quite limited. I think this debate that's going on, largely being played out through the internal divisions of the Conservative Party for Mr. Corbyn's supporters, is, just as we were saying at the beginning, quite a useful breathing space. They see it that way. However, there absolutely are senior Labour MPs who are champing at the bit to get involved in this argument. And there is frustration that Jeremy Corbyn is not, as it seems, planning to be out there front and central, trying to make this their campaign too. One point worth bearing in mind, though, which is going to make me sound like even more of a political anorak than I normally do, the official backing of this campaign by the Labour Party to stay in the European Union is important because it gives the in-campaign access to Labour's data about voters and in the constituencies around the country. And if you may remember, the Conservative Central Office made a decision to remain neutral, which means that they don't have access to the Conservative Party data. Now, I know that sounds terribly arcane and technical, but in terms of getting out the vote, in terms of knowing where people are, being able to knock them up on the door and actually make the case to get them down to the polling station, these kinds of things really do matter.
The polling evidence we have so far, and of course it's a moving feast as the referendum picks up, suggests that Conservative voters are more likely to vote to leave than to remain. So I would suggest you need Labour to win this referendum.
Well, I think that there's a lot of undecideds, and there are also quite a lot of evidence that there are quite a lot of Conservative voters who say that they would be significantly influenced by what the Prime Minister recommends.
I understand that.
And so I think that I would be pretty confident that a majority of Conservative voters will be voting, as I will, to remain in a reformed European
We're not
Union.
even sure if a majority of your Conservative backbenchers are going to vote for it.
No, but Conservative voters, there are, whatever it is, 11 million of them.
Yeah, but they're the people that elect your backbenchers.
Politically activist group.
I mean, at the moment, there's a clear majority. I mean, I perfectly accept things can change now that Mr. Cameron's come out and so on, and he has influence among Conservative voters, of course. But at the moment, the polling I've seen suggests quite a clear majority of Conservative voters would vote to leave.
Well, this is the start of a campaign, and I think the most significant thing that we all saw this week, or were reminded of, and which I think will play very large in the minds of voters, is that there is one person in this entire campaign who genuinely he has no further election to fight. He's not trying to get progress in his career. I'm a politician. I want to get on. That's true of everybody else who's campaigning for Remain. It's true of everybody else.
What, even Boris Johnson?
Alan Johnson, actually, I think I'd give another example of someone who I don't believe
Alan
has further ambition. But the
demands.
Prime Minister, everybody in Britain knows that he's not standing for re-election as Prime Minister. And so when he says to them, I'm telling you, it's in the national interest to stay in a reformed European Union, then I believe that people will be heavily influenced by that because they know that he's got no other agenda.
But there's no politician who wants to go
Except his
into the
place in
history
history.
books. Yeah, exactly. who wants to go into the history books as the
Which
one
he's now
who's
very
lost it.
exercised about.
You'd love
He's
to
very
go to history books
exercised.
as
If he
as the
loses
person
this
who took us out of the
referendum,
EU.
if he loses this
he went
hold
to
on.
history
If
book
he
as a
loses
loser.
this referendum, he joins the long line of prime ministers that had to step down at a time not of their choosing. So the idea that he doesn't really have a dog in this fight beggars belief and could only be thought a feasible argument inside the Westminster bubble. We've run out of time on that point.
Plenty more in the months to come.
See you next week.
Indeed.
Thank you.